Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian. I'm co-founder at Ruby Reese and I will also be your host. This week, a super exciting topic, the teenage dog brain, and we will have an equally brilliant guest speaker on to talk all about that. That is Catherine from Little Woofers Dog Training. Catherine is one half of the brilliant duo that makes up Little Woofers, and we had the other half, who is Killian, on the podcast a couple of months ago. So delighted to share that conversation with you in a few moments. My intro is also quite inspired by Catherine and the chat that I had with her. And, you know, Catherine did a brilliant job of bringing up a topic that's really very, very frequently heard on the podcast, and that's treating every single dog as an individual, and with the idea that every single being is indeed an individual being. And it's, I suppose, a bit difficult when I ask speakers to come on and talk about a topic, because in the very nature of a podcast, we're going to make huge sweeping generalizations that are definitely not going to be relevant to every single dog. But we wouldn't have a format if we had to, if we had to go in on every single individual possibility. It's just not possible. So to talk about a topic, yes, we will oversimplify. Yes, we will make sweeping statements that no, it might not be relevant to your specific dog. But I think that has to be okay. We have to be okay with the fact that, to talk about anything, if we're going to have any sort of conversation, that yes, of course, there'll be exceptions. Yes, of course, there will be differences of opinion. And there's so much more nuance than we can pack into, say, a half an hour conversation. So I suppose with our podcast in general, I know and you know that every single dog is an individual. And in fact, you know, there's going to be more than just this, whatever topic we're speaking about in 1 week, that affects that dog as well. From their stress levels to their pain levels to their nutrition, their energy, their definitely breed, but also not breed, because they're an individual within that breed. So they mightn't follow your typical breed standard. So there's so many other nuts and bolts, but we just wouldn't have a podcast if we weren't able to make sweeping generalizations. So on that note, I just wanted to ask you to be mindful that there will be exceptions, and the exceptions will always prove the rule. But it's definitely so worthwhile to look at each and every living being as an individual with their own needs, wishes, etc. And that goes across, like I mentioned, all sorts of care, but also you might think of things like their exercise needs, their enrichment needs, etc. So it's fascinating to think about, looking at all of these topics in their generalized form and then saying, wow, what and how much of this applies to my own dog, and my own life and my own training, etc. So that's enough from my side. Now I am delighted to introduce you and invite you in to the conversation that I had with Catherine from Little Woofers. Catherine, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for coming on and joining me.
Thank you for having us today.
Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself briefly?
Yeah, I'm Catherine. I am one half of Little Woofers. Killian, my husband, is the other half of Little Woofers. We are both IMDT trainers. I am a behaviour consultant with the ISCP. Killian does SENT work with the UK College SENT section. And we are both trained in gait analysis. So we do dynamic dog assessments where we look at dogs' movements to see if there's any kind of pain or discomfort in their movements.
Super interesting, and thank you for that brilliant introduction. And you picked a really interesting topic to talk about as well today. We decided to speak about the teenage dog brain.
Yeah.
So let's launch into this, because I love this phase, and I've never had a in detail chat about it before, so I'm looking forward to learning along with everyone else as well. what exactly is the teenage phase in dogs, and maybe what age does it usually refer to?
Yeah, so the teenage phase in dogs is like it's a physical and behavioral changes. There's a hormonal shift. So your male dogs will be getting a hit of testosterone, your female dog will be getting their estrogen and progesterone. And then so they start to increase their independence. There's curiosity and exploration starts to come through. There's their HPA axis, which is the stress response axis, takes twice as long to recover than it does in pups or adult dogs. And it kind of can start between the 5 to 6 month age and can go anywhere up until 3, 4 years of age, depending on your breed and size of dog.
Okay, yeah. I'm presuming the larger dogs typically take that bit longer, like with everything else.
Yeah, so like your smaller dogs will kind of hit it in around the 5 month mark and end it sooner, and your larger breeds will kind of come into it later and end it later.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And how does the dog's behavior change during this, like particularly in comparison, I suppose, to puppyhood?
Yeah, so you'll see your normal puppy, they're following you around, they worship the ground you walk on, you're fantastic. And then all of a sudden you get an increase of independence. So that recall doesn't work as well, or they're on their walk, they're over in that ditch sniffing it rather than being beside you. They start testing boundaries. So can I get away with this if I do that? Their fear and anxiety can increase a little bit as well. And then you can sometimes see because you get that hormone increase, you get the sexual behavior, so the humping behavior. Now, I will caveat that with that humping can come from a place of frustration as well. So it may not just
Mhm.
be a hormonal change, it could be a place of frustration. So we always look at the dog in front of us and what's going on with them as well.
Yeah, it's always going to be individual with any dog, I
Yeah.
suppose. So it makes total sense to treat them as that as well. And you've mentioned hormones. So
Yes.
could you compare this to the human adolescent phase then as well?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
your human adolescent, they'll both go through that hormone surge, but they'll also go through a brain change, a rapid brain change. So when you have your pup, they're learning everything about the world. They're taking absolutely everything in, and some of it they don't really need to know. And it's you
Mhm.
use it or lose it. So if you think of Dr. Daniel Segal, and he has a really interesting way of explaining it. So this is a brain, a human brain. So all
Mhm.
mammalian brains are very, very similar when they're made up. Um, but there are some differences. So like your human brain is bigger, it's got 86 billion neurons versus a dog's brain that's slightly smaller with about 530 million neurons. So there are
Okay.
differences, but the
Mhm.
makeup of all mammalian brains are very, very similar. So that's your brain. We deconstruct it. Here you have your brain stem, you have your limbic parts of the brain, and you have your cortex. Your brain stem is your unconscious thinking. So your heart rate, your breathing, all that kind of stuff happens here. Your limbic part of the brain, which is your primal part of the brain, is fight, flight, emotional part of the brain. And then you've got your cortex, which is your rational decision making part of the brain. Now, when I said puppies learn absolutely everything about the world, they have all these neurons and sometimes they don't need them. So in the teenage phase, they go through this thing called pruning. If you don't use it, you lose it. So this part of the brain is under reconstruction. Because this part of the brain is under reconstruction, they end up a lot of the time in the limbic part of the brain, which is your emotional part of the brain. And you see it with adolescent humans as well. They will make an emotional decision rather than a rational decision. Should I go
Mhm.
home and study, or will I go out with my friends?
Okay. Yeah.
Your puppy's doing the same. Will I come back to that recall cue, or will I run off and have a bit of crack? That's what's going on for them at that time. So the brain is under rapid reconstruction during that teenage phase.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, and thank you for that imagery as well, because that's something that I've never heard. I've never heard of it described this way, so that's making a whole lot of sense in a different way to me now. And I suppose you've mentioned some of the things, the changes that we see in our dogs, but maybe if someone isn't really sure whether their dog is entering this phase, what kind of signs do we see? How can owners recognize when their dogs are entering this phase?
Yeah, so they'll get the typical deaf ear, like your teenager
Mhm.
gets their typical deaf ear, get down out of that bedroom, they don't hear you. Um, Then it's the pushing boundary. So what can I get away with? If I jumped on that counter and did a bit of counter surfing, will I get away with it? If I go to the toilet in the house again, will I get away with it? Constantly just doing them pushing behaviours. And then you may have some social problems or issues. So remember I was saying that HPA axis takes twice as long to bounce back than a puppy or a adult dog. If we don't give them that chance to come back down, that's where you start to get your bad behaviours, what we would consider to be bad behaviours. They're just being dogs, they're just doing dog behaviours. So like, say they went out for a walk on a Monday and they had a bad reaction, or they didn't do something we wanted them to do, say. So they might have barked at another dog, they lunged at another dog, they barked at a human, whatever this may be. If we don't give them a chance to come back down, usually it takes about 3 to 7 days for a dog to come back down. But for a teenage dog, it's going to be longer than that. So if we don't give them that chance to come back down, that's where we're going to come into issues for later life. And that's where we need to look at our dog and understand where they are and where they're at that time and day. So we always look at our teenage dog and go, can you actually listen today? So can you do a sit in the house? Okay, grand. We go outside the door. Can you do a sit outside the door? You know from a puppy they can do it. If they can't do it that day, then maybe that's not the day to go for a walk or do a learning exercise with them. Maybe that's the day to do some enrichment or some nose work or some trick training in the house. So we always just look at the dog and where they're at that day. So if your dog can't listen to you, then that's not the day to do something you want to try new. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you could consider some of the changes in their brain as well and in their physiology to be almost positive things. I know behavior is just dogs being dogs, and it's only our perception of it, but could we perceive some things as a positive as well? And I'm asking because when Ruby was a puppy, she was a puppy that that we knew we had to kind of reinforce her confidence and really make her feel safe with interacting maybe with the world a bit more confidently. Whereas when she entered her teenage phase, I think, or it was our perception anyway, that yes, she got more stroppy. Yes, she did get more of a selective hearing. Yes, she did become more of a diva, a bit more self-centered, and stopped, idolizing us and expected to be idolized more. But one of the positive things I would have perceived from this is that she felt more confident in the world. She did feel kind of a little bit more sassy, and that was kind of, brought both positive and negative connotations with it. So do you think there could also be some positives that come along with this phase as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that burst for a male dog in testosterone is going to give them a little bit more confidence and whatnot. But at the same time, we've got to look at where the brain is in that day and are they able and capable of learning in that day. So it's all about, like, if you have a great day, fantastic, reward it, and try remember that day the next day. So when you have not such a good day, you have something to think back on, like, oh my God, my pup hasn't fallen apart. I still have this lovely dog. It's just going to take me time to get back to where I need to get back to. Yes, they can have more confidence, but they can also lack confidence as well. It just depends on the day and where they're sitting in that brain.
Sure. Yeah. It's like you say, it's a time of rapid change.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned challenges. So are people fraught with challenges during this phase? I can imagine people listening in now that have a puppy that's getting to the older puppy stages and getting slightly terrified. So is it normal that everyone has challenges, and how worried should people be maybe about the teenage phase?
Yeah, everyone's going to have challenges. Just like when we were teenagers, we had challenges. It's going to be there. It's about how we respond to that. So we've got to make sure that we're doing positive reinforcement, that we are controlling and managing situations. So if you know your dog is going to try and counter surf, that we don't have stuff on the counters. And if they do walk into the kitchen and they don't jump on the counters, reward them, reward what you like, ignore what you don't like, nearly treat them like they're back in their puppyhood. So you might have a pup where they're pushing boundaries. So you did toilet training, they're going outside, great. The teenage phase comes in and they're starting to go to the toilets inside again. That's fine, it's going to happen. So we start to go back to puppyhood. We bring them back outside. We reward them when they go outside. We ignore them when they go inside. So it's about being consistent and positive with how we are approaching our dogs that age.
Yeah, I love that approach that you're kind of setting your dog up for success, which is something that comes up
Constantly.
on this podcast literally every episode. And it's something that I love to hear. And I suppose, like we mentioned already, I think about breeds briefly, but are there breeds that tend to, be more prone to behavioral issues during this phase, or is it really down to an individual level only?
Yeah, so like every dog is individual. We always look at every dog
Hmm.
as if it's an individual. But there are traits in dogs. So like your herding breeds might be more herdy. Your gun dogs might be a bit more prey driven at that time. I'm not saying every dog is going to be like that, but some do fall into the traits they were bred for, others don't. It's about knowing your dog and looking at what is going on for them.
And energy levels, do you think energy levels, do we see that they change rapidly as well? Do dogs tend to have more energy? Do they tend to be more lethargic? I don't know. What does that look like?
Yeah, so they tend to have a lot more energy, but it's about us focusing that energy. So going for your 5 kilometer walk and thinking they're going to be tired isn't going to be enough at that age. We've got to start
Mhm.
thinking about how to get that brain mentally going. And there is a study from 2018 that showed there was one set that did heel work every day and another set that did nose work every day. And at the end of the study, the set that did nose work every day were a lot more optimistic. So if we kind of start to introduce a bit more nose work into our teenage dogs, maybe that when they're older, they'll be a bit more optimistic and a bit more confident in themselves rather than going out for that walk and trying to get them tired physically. We also got to try get them tired mentally as well.
Yeah, and actually that's interesting. So you're kind of saying channel this energy and this period that's kind of going to be a bit hands-on anyway, and channel that into kind of giving them kind of tools on how to use all of their senses in the future, right?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
suppose they can train on a lot of really exciting things for the future then.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% you're right.
And talking about particularly rebellious or stubborn teenage dogs, are there any other, training techniques that really stand out as being really good for dealing with those situations?
Yeah, so dogs in their teenage phase, it's really, really, and it's crucial about not flooding them, not pushing them too much. We've got to reward what we like. We've got to ignore what we don't like. We've got to be positive in our training. It can get frustrating. It can get, oh my God, I had this gorgeous little puppy and now they've turned into this terrorist. They will come back around again. If we keep going the way we're going, you will get a dog that's very what we determine good at the end of
Yeah.
it. But it's about being consistent, controlling, managing our situations, and just being positive in our manner with them. There's no point in giving out to them. They're not going to understand why we're giving out to them. And that kind of can break our bond with our dog then as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's important to kind of keep that line of communication open. And you mentioned consistency. So how important are routines? Would you say they're more important in this life phase really than in others?
Again, it can depend on the dog. So, like in the human world, you have your introverts and your extroverts. So, if you have
Hmm.
an introvert teenage dog, yes, they are going to thrive in a routine. If you have an extrovert, you've probably got a bit more leniency on your routines and whatnot like that as well. So, again, it is dog dependent and where your dog is at.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for us, for example, it was really Ruby coming out of a slightly more introverted and into a more extroverted kind of life phase. So it was really interesting. She got more interested in exploring the world, and yeah, it was a quite a positive phase, I suppose, to see her kind of more energized to go out and explore. So it was good. And talking about neutering then and spaying, because this can come up at the same time, does this impact a dog's teenage phase and their behavior at the time?
So, no, basically, the only scientifically proven thing that neutering is shown to help is males marking. That's the only thing
Mhm.
it's going to help. There's pros and cons to
Yeah.
neutering, and it's an absolute minefield. But the
Mhm.
short of it is scientifically, it only lowers the rate a male will mark.
Mhm. Okay. And then there's nothing can be guaranteed then
Yeah,
after that,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, exactly.
And you've already mentioned about mental stimulation, so I'm presuming this is not just about one thing or another. It's about figuring out what the individual dog really likes at this time
Yeah,
in their life, right?
absolutely. So when our girl Eve, when she was in her teenage phase, if we gave her something chewy, afterwards she was roiled up. She was really
Mm.
like nearly pent up. But if we gave her something nicky, she was nearly like a drunk person lying there. She was kind of happy out,
Okay. Yeah.
docile, calm. Whereas we gave her something chewy, it excited her a little bit more. So it's about what works for your dog and look what calms them and keeps them relaxed. If it heightens them and gets them over aroused, then I probably wouldn't be doing something like that. With their training as well, I would keep it short and consistent. So
Hmm.
rather than people say, like, do 10 minutes here and there, I'd keep it at maybe 30 seconds here, a minute there, 2 minutes, maybe back down to 30 seconds. So we're not tiring that teenage brain out, but we're also keeping it thinking as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody's favorite topic then, socialization. What role does socialization play during this stage of life, and how can owners manage interactions, I suppose, with other dogs, with other humans, and with the world at large?
Yeah. Again, as I was saying earlier, look at your dog. If your dog can't listen to you that day, that's not a day to socialize your dog. If your dog
Hmm.
is on point that day, absolutely. But we've got to be careful we're not flooding your dogs. So we've got to look at, okay, can the dog listen? Yes. Okay, so we're going to go out now and we're going to have a play date and maybe keep it short. So maybe it's only 5, 10 minutes. We have a habit of going, oh well, it's going great. You know what? We'll leave them play. And that's where it can escalate. And that's where they are emotionally making their decisions. And that's where when they get tired, they'll more emotionally make a decision, if that makes sense. So if we call it early, we control and manage the situation like we do with the rest of the teenage phase, then it should be fine. But if we don't, then that's where we can have trouble. If we start flooding them.
And you mentioned as well checking in with your dog and trying to see how they react and things like that. This is kind of a tool that I didn't really have in my toolkit until recently, let's say a couple of months ago. Of really having a couple of very simple commands to see if Ruby's actually still there, if she's,
Yeah,
still willing to communicate with us. And it wasn't something that I was made aware of. So I kind of want to outline it because it might
yeah.
be something that others don't either. What would you suggest are good ways of testing, how much your dog is willing to communicate with you, and whether they're still in the room with us?
Yeah, exactly. So as I was saying earlier, if they can do a sit in the house, maybe they can listen.
Yeah.
If they can do sit outside the house, they can listen. That's if your dog knows a sit. If they don't know a sit, maybe it could be a hand
Hmm.
touch. So that's where the dog comes in and touches their nose to your hand. Maybe it could be just as simple as reflex the name. You say their name and they don't listen to you. Maybe that's not the day to do it. But if they turn around on a penny and look at you and you're like, okay, well, maybe today is the day that they can listen. But we just need to do it in simple environments first and then bring them out into the big bad world.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you gave us different options there as well, because I know that Ruby, like in general, she doesn't like certain commands, like the things like sit. Now it's partially because she has luxating patella,
Yeah.
which we're managing. Sit is number one uncomfortable for her, but she's not that type of dog anyway. She
Mm.
likes the energetic kind of things, so a hand touch is perfect for checking in with her. If you can get her to just tip your hand,
Yeah.
it's brilliant way of checking in. And yeah, it's, I suppose, always down to the individual, really, as like you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's about them knowing the cue as well. There's no point in doing a hand touch if they don't know it.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose the most difficult time then to start training brand new things is probably during the teenage phase in the first place, right?
Yeah. You try to stick to what they know, and things that are really hard to teach is teenagers, whether it's human or dog, like movement. So I don't know, like in a class situation, you see people fidgeting or moving or mooching or whatever. It's the same for a dog, a teenage dog. They like to learn on the move. So your sit days are very, very difficult for a teenage dog. But
Hmm.
your hand touch or your recall or something else that's movement motivated will be much better to train at that age.
Yeah. Definitely. And then setting boundaries. So I suppose none of us like to go into this parenting phase in the teenage stage, but I suppose we're always playing kind of a balancing act in this phase, you know, between setting boundaries but also keeping the bond quite strong. So how do we navigate that?
It'd be more about control and management. So if you
Yeah.
know they're going to push a boundary of jumping up to get food off a counter, if you know they're going to push a boundary of trying to go to the toilet in the house, setting so they're not allowed into the kitchen unless there's someone in there, there's baby gates in place. If they start to go to the toilet, then you're bringing them out on lead and rewarding them when to go to the toilet outside. So it's not about you're not allowed to do this. It's more
Mm.
about your managing these situations for your pup to make good decisions. And every good decision they make, reward it heavily.
That's brilliant. Yeah, exactly. Keep setting themselves up for success
Yeah,
again and again.
yeah.
And I suppose I want to hit that nail in the head again as well. You know, if people think that there's a bit of regression going on, they're going moving back towards the puppy stages. It's not a bad thing. It's not
No,
unusual, right?
no, it's very, very, very common. And to be honest, it's the age that dogs kind of end up in rescue at as well. Because you've had
Mm.
this lovely puppy, you've put all the training in, you've done the toilet training, you've done the night getting up and bringing them out, you've done the classes, you've done everything, you've done the best for this dog. And then they hit the teenage phase and it's like they've forgotten everything. And people are like, I just can't do this anymore. And that's where you just got to keep going. You've got to keep that positive reinforcement going. You've got to just remember you had a lovely puppy and they will be a lovely adult at the end of it. And saying that, in the teenage phase, they can dip in and out of it. So like at 6, 7 months, they could be at their worst of it. And then they'll get a phase where they'll be back in the room, they'll be present. And then a couple of days later, they might not be there again. So you will have it will be a balancing act of seeing where your dog is. And it won't be fully for the 3 years. They will bounce in and out of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's even thinking back, Ruby's only 4.5 at the moment, and I can hardly even remember her teenage phase. You know, in preparation for this conversation, I definitely did a bit of thinking about what our life was like then, but pretty much even forgotten it. You know,
Yeah,
it can pass quite quickly, and it can be so kind of struggle free, and you know the frustration you have in this moment might be quite large, but it
yeah.
doesn't have to be for a very long time.
Everything comes to an end.
Yeah, it does. Everything passes.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose to think as well more broadly now about the teenage dog brain. Are there any common myths or misconceptions in and around the teenage phase that you'd like to debunk?
Yeah, so one of them is getting your dog neutered is going to sort all of their issues out.
Mm,
Really,
yeah,
really does not happen. Um, so the teenage phase will pass quickly. This is while the intensity may decrease, some of the
yeah.
behaviours may persist. And it's about addressing them correctly. So again, as we were saying before, your positive reinforcement, your boundaries, your control and management of the situation. Engage with a trainer, engage with a behaviourist, engage with someone who's going to understand what you're going through. It can be lonely when it's on your own. Whereas if you've got someone you can kind of chat to and bounce ideas off, it can really help and make you not feel so isolated as well. And they've probably been through this. And if they haven't been through this, they've been through this with other clients. So they'll be able to be more sympathetic to you.
I totally agree with you. I think a trainer or behaviorist is essential for this phase because I think while many other people in your life might be well meaning,
Yeah.
they're potentially old fashioned
Yeah.
ideas and everything mightn't be very helpful anymore. And I'm sure there's plenty of wives' tales in and around the teenage phases there.
Yeah. It's like any phase. There's a million ways. Everyone is a trainer or a behaviourist. They've had dogs for many, many years. And look,
Yeah.
it's progressed hugely over the last 40, 50 years. Many things have been
Mhm.
debunked.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Was there anything else about the teenage brain? I know we could speak for hours about it
Yes.
potentially, but was there anything else that we hugely missed out on, or do you think we represented the phase quite well?
I think that is all of it. It's just looking at your dog, seeing where they're at, assessing are they okay in that day, and then moving on. Again, never be afraid to reach out for help. If you need help, reach out to someone, a positive trainer, or a behaviourist or someone that you think is going to be able to help you out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think frustration will definitely pass. The frustrating period will pass, but there are people that can help. I think that's such a powerful message to give to people. And it's natural as well. I mean, dogs have always matured in this way. So it's natural. It'll be fine. And all those lovely dogs that you see growing into old age that are so placid in their senior years, they were once a teenager too. So it's like, definitely,
people look at our Eve and they're like, oh, she's such a good dog, she's so amazing, she's so great. It wasn't a straight road to get there. She had her deaf ear. She had days where she didn't want to listen to us or learn or train, and we just looked at her and we went, okay, today isn't the day. We'll come back to this tomorrow and see if you're willing then.
Exactly. So set them up for success, treat them as an individual, and you will get there. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on and picking such a, I suppose, complex and, slightly controversial phase in a dog's life to chat about. It's been so good to clear up all of those myths, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been great to be on as well. Thank you for having us.
Thanks a million, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And once again, a huge thank you to Catherine for coming on and joining us on the podcast this week. If you would like to see what Little Woofers gets up to on a day-to-day basis, or what Ruby Reese gets up to indeed, you can find all of our social media handles and our websites in the show notes. You would also be doing this podcast a huge favour if you gave us a subscribe or a follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we will be back next Tuesday, as well as every other Tuesday, hopefully this year, with another podcast. So we hope you have a lovely week and hope to see you again soon.